Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to TASC and Nat for the invitation to present to you all here this afternoon. I suppose if I can start maybe somewhat with beginning my contribution here this afternoon with a caveat and a little bit of a health warning, which was my initial response when Nat originally invited me to present today. I am not an economist, and I'm very conscious I'm in a room with many economists. But what I am in terms of my role and my organisation's role as its executive director, I'm here maybe just this afternoon to give you a flavour of a civil society perspective on some of the topics at hand. So European Movement Ireland, what do we do? Well, we're a not-for-profit membership-based organisation, and we try to develop the connection between Ireland and Europe. As the oldest Irish organisation dealing with Irish-EU relations, we're surrounded in our day-to-day work by European affairs and the current economic situation. The trajectory of the EU, its very future, and its relationship with its citizens, particularly in Ireland's case, are particularly important to the work that we do, and it's something that we constantly try and improve, which I will confess can certainly be a challenge at times. So just in terms of my presentation this afternoon, what I hope to do is give you, highlight some of the current economic situation in Europe, some of the flaws in EMU and how that's affecting people in countries like Ireland and how that's inputting into people's views on the EU itself. With all the talk and debate on fiscal crisis, deficits, burning the bondholders, the Troika, it's extremely easy to lose sight of the fact that Europe is more than an economy. Europe is about its citizens. Today, the current state of play, for many, the EU has symbolised prosperity, safety and competence to its member states. However, today, there are 26 million people across the Union without work, 5.7 million of which are young people, that is under the age of 25. 12.2% of the EU's young people are currently unemployed, with worryingly high figures, particularly in countries such as Greece and Spain. 115 million people around the EU are in or at risk of poverty and social exclusion. Simply put, we cannot allow this to continue. There is nothing more destructive to society and more crushing to an individual than unemployment, and particularly so at a young age. The longer Europe's unemployment problem goes on, the more difficult this is to fix. We would argue that Europe's primary and most urgent task now must be to get us back to sustainable employment levels and to bring about a return to real growth. Let's be fair, measures are being taken in terms of trying to redress this at a slower pace, arguably, than one would wish, but youth employment measures are being taken. The agreements reached on and the budget allocated to the Youth Guarantee, which aims to ensure that all people under the age of 25 received a good quality offer of employment, education, apprenticeship or training within 4 months of becoming unemployed, I believe do show real commitment on the part of the EU institutions to address and combat youth unemployment quickly and we can only hope effectively. To give credit where it's due, this has been one of the important achievements of the current and our 7th Irish presidency of the Council of the EU, which has a number of weeks left to run before we pass the baton on to Lithuania. So just in terms of European Monetary Union, and maybe just some of the positives. What has it achieved? Well, firstly, it has helped to open up the internal market to more than 330 million citizens living in the Eurozone area, and by extension to over 550 million citizens in the wider EU. By eliminating exchange rate risk and foreign transaction costs, it has facilitated a more efficient distribution of resources and ensured price transparency for goods and services across countries. Also, it has achieved facilitation of trade between Eurozone countries and promotion of fiscal and financial investment between member states. Notwithstanding the current economic crisis, as the world's second largest reserve currency, the relative stability of the euro has made the Eurozone an attractive investment destination. Membership of the Eurozone, which currently stands at 17 member states, is set to increase in the future. Slovakia joined the single currency in January 2009, followed by Estonia in January 2011. And next year, at the start of 2014, Latvia is set to become the 18th member. But as you have already heard today, European Monetary Union is far from perfect, to say the least. It certainly was, and I don't think anyone can deny, an imperfect creation, and what we are now left with is certainly proving challenging in terms of being fit for purpose. There are a number of fragilities. It is not an optimal currency area. We lack a fiscal transfer mechanism for asymmetric shocks, as well as automatic stabilisers. We have a monetary union, but no banking union, leaving us without a centralised authority responsible for the supervision, regulation, and, if necessary, resolution of financial institutions. On the 18th of April, just recently, EU member states agreed on the setting up of a new EU single supervisor for banks. This followed a key breakthrough in ministerial talks at the ECOFIN informal meeting in Dublin. But on the 31st of May, just very recently, France and Germany have published an alternative proposal for European economic governance. And this plan calls for a greater role for national authorities in the resolution and recovery of banks, which is somewhat in contrast to Brussels' preference for an enhanced role for the ECB. And I think it's something that Malcolm and Stephen touched upon, but the rules underpinning EMU, as set out in the Stability and Growth Pact, were broken by member states, and initially by France and Germany in 2003. On top of this, the SGP lacked robust mechanisms to ensure sustainable public finances. The coordination of national economic policies beyond the budget area was certainly a challenge in terms of countering the progressive opening of competitiveness gaps and growth divergences between member states. In addition, little consideration was given to the Eurozone-wide spillover effect of national measures, and national economic policy making paid insufficient attention to the European context within which European economies operate. The asymmetry between integrated financial markets on the one hand and a nationally segmented financial stability architecture on the other resulted in inadequate coordination among the relevant authorities at all stages of the current crisis. So while the EU has taken some action to address these major challenges, it is important to debate and ensure that we take measures to continue to work our way out of this crisis to ensure that we never again find ourselves in a similar situation. In March of last year, 25 of the EU's 27 member states, including all 17 Eurozone countries, signed the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in the European Monetary Union. Again, the title, the TASCG, was shortened to the Fiscal Stability Treaty or the Fiscal Austerity Treaty, depending on one's viewpoint. And essentially, it committed Eurozone countries to incorporate the EU's rules and principles of budgetary surveillance into their national legal frameworks. This represented a major steps in attempts to rectify or redress some design flaws, and it has been an important development both for the EMU itself and for the signatory states. But one question that I would like to pose to you all here today is, again, what about the citizens? The turnout in the Irish referendum on the Fiscal Stability Treaty was just 50.6%. Essentially, over 1.5 million Irish people chose, for whatever reason, we cannot know definitively, not to come out on the 31st of May 2012 and to vote either for or against the treaty. Certainly, Irish turnout at European referenda has never been particularly high, and in fairness, we have had many European referendum, with the exception actually of the referendum in 1973 on our accession to the ESC, which saw in excess of 70% of the electorate vote back then. I would argue, however, that the low turnout should not be disregarded out of hand. Rather, it represents a serious manifestation of a deep-rooted disconnect between the Irish people and Europe, and we need to ensure that we tackle this rather than ignore it. We must be cognizant of the old credo that apathy is the glove into which evil slips its hand. Following on, just in terms of our relationship with the EMU, Europe's citizens have long struggled to connect with the institutions, the European Commission, the European Parliament, the ECB, the European Council, Oftentimes they are geographically distant, they can be hard to understand and seem faceless, and they often deal with obscure technicalities. On top of this, many citizens feel disenfranchised because they don't have a direct say in electing many of our representatives in these institutions. It can become a them versus us scenario, and it's important that we take measures to ensure that this cannot continue. The current crisis in which we find ourselves has unsurprisingly worsened this situation. According to research conducted by the Pew Research Centre just last month into public attitudes in 8 European countries, an average of 29% of people in Britain, the Czech Republic, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Poland and Spain believed that economic integration in Europe has strengthened their country. This is a reduction from 43% in 2009. On a national level, in Italy and Greece, this figure stands at 11%. So essentially, 89% of Italians and Greeks surveyed believe that European economic integration has fundamentally been bad for their countries. In France, things weren't much better, with 78% of respondents believing that European economic integration has been bad for France. A particularly useful tool when considering the relationship between its citizens and the EU is the Barometer. This EU-wide survey, conducted twice annually, examines trends in European public opinion. The most recent survey, conducted in November last year, had a particular focus on the experiences of and attitudes to European citizenship, as 2013 has been designated European Year of Citizens by the European Commission. And some interesting results were produced. Trust in the European institutions across the EU stands at 33%. This figure actually represents an increase of 2 percentage points on the previous survey of spring 2012, but it is nonetheless the second lowest rate recorded in the last 10 years, and any gain is within the margin of error. When the spring 2013 results are published next month, we should have a better idea. Within these findings, we also see that Irish citizens' trust in the European institutions falls below the European average, standing at 29%. In Italy, the rate is slightly higher at 31%, but in Spain, it stands at 20%, and in Greece at 18%. So I do apologise on a Friday afternoon for bamboozling you with some statistics, but I hope you'll bear with me. That all said, we must remember that it's not just European institutions that are losing the trust of citizens, with just 18% of Irish citizens trusting the National Parliament, the Dáil and the government. I'm by nature, I try to be anyway, somewhat of an optimist. So it's not all bad news in that 69% of Irish respondents surveyed said that they felt some degree of European citizenship, which is above the EU average of 63%, and higher than other countries currently in bailout programmes. Portugal standing at 59%, Cyprus 55%, and Greece at 46%. And one question we must ask ourselves as Irish people, and following recent developments with Prime Minister Cameron's speech, is what will we as a country do if Britain decides to leave the EU? With a referendum promised in 2017, should the UK's Conservative Party secure re-election, a Brexit is a real possibility, and I think this is something we cannot afford to ignore. Britain is Ireland's largest export market, while Ireland is Britain's 5th largest export market. The trade relationship between the two countries, which sees almost €1 billion worth of goods traded weekly, rests upon the assumption of a single market. Ireland's prospects for economic recovery will largely be determined by our ability to continue developing trade and investment opportunities with our key export and inward investment markets. Just some interesting follow-on statistics. In January, at the start of the Irish Presidency, and about 3 weeks after a very tough December budget, we in European Movement Ireland, we commissioned Red C to carry out a poll at the start of the Irish Presidency in order to ascertain Irish people's views on a variety of different topics related to Irish-EU relations. So what did the poll find? Well, essentially, as you can see there, 85% of those surveyed felt that Ireland should remain part of the EU. Taking everything into consideration, 83% of those surveyed felt that Ireland has on balance benefited from being a member of the EU. When asked should Ireland leave the Eurozone, 25% of those surveyed said it should, and if the UK were to leave the EU, that figure rose to 29%. So again, we were somewhat surprised by those high level of figures and findings, and we look forward to doing the follow-on corollary to the survey over the coming weeks at the end of the Irish Presidency. So in terms of fixing the design flaws and fixing the relationship of the design flaws inherited in the system we have created, some positive developments in terms of the creation of the EFSM and the FSF were important crisis resolution mechanisms designed to address financial market fragility and mitigate the risk of contagion across member states. In addition, the ECB has taken a number of more pragmatic developments over the last number of years. As we have seen, the bank has cut interest rates. There has been 3-year loans extended and agreeing a bond purchase programme. One thing, though, that has often been said, and for too long, I believe, the EU suffers from a number of deficits. It suffers from a democratic deficit, legitimacy deficit, a credibility deficit, accountability deficit, transparency deficit, political leadership deficit, and certainly a delivery deficit on times. So if we want to try and address these deficits on occasions, it's important that the question of the relationship between the EU and its citizens, it cannot be separated out from the current economic situation we find ourselves in. Relationships are based on trust. When we speak of relationships with the institutions, organisations, or bodies such as the European Union itself, this trust comes from the transparency, credibility, and accountability of the organisation and the institutions. We believe very strongly in the importance of encouraging engagement in the decision-making process, and this is why we encourage people to input directly into the work of the Eurozone institutions by, for example, participating in the consultations organised by the European Commission. These consultations are a real opportunity for us all to input and have our say. Over the last 3 years, European Movement Ireland has published an accountability report where we use a series of statistical indicators to track, analyse, measure and record Irish EU engagement. One of the findings that we track and analyse is the rate of Irish submissions to Commission consultations. For the 2012 report, our most recent report, the percentage of the total submissions that originated in Ireland ranged from 0% to 4.75%, with an average of 1.4%. So of a total of 112 Commission consultations in 2012, we were able to analyse 51, because only 51 clearly specify the geographical origin of the submission. So Ireland represents 1.6% of the total EU population, so 1.4% as an average could be viewed as satisfactory. I would argue, why should we settle for satisfactory or proportionate? For example, there was a consultation on a possible framework for recovery and resolution of non-bank financial institutions, which closed in December 2012, or the consultation on the recommendations of the high-level expert group on reforming the structure of the EU banking sector, which closed the previous month. Out of a total of 67 submissions to the former, there were 2 originating in Ireland, and the rate for the latter had 1 out of 90 submissions originating in Ireland. Granted, Commission consultations are only one means of inputting people's views and voices, but they are, and the whole process is, an important portal through which Irish citizens, organisations can set out their agenda and have a direct input into policy creation at an EU level. It is important that increased engagement occurs at this area. Finally, in conclusion, although EU citizens may not feel that they are currently benefiting from economic integration, and trust is certainly running low in relation to the institutions, the majority still wish to remain members. I think it's important that we make the most of this situation before the minority who question the value of EU membership become the majority. 2013 has, as I'm sure you're aware, been designated European Year of Citizens. We would argue that this is a very important and opportunity to boost citizen engagement around Europe. we are running a series of regional dialogues, which we believe is important to afford people the chance to meet national and European politicians and to engage in robust and open debate. We have to pay more than lip service. We have to increase the level of engagement. When we talk about trust in EU institutions, trust in all-time political institutions is certainly at a low. EU pessimism is often linked to the economic situation. For example, in the 1980s, many people thought that the EU was finished. If the EU economy bounces back, I think it's important that perhaps a lot of pessimism would evaporate. We need to increase job stability and growth. And we also need to have a debate and a dialogue about our relationship with the European Union. Some have voiced concerns at the prospect of sweeping institutional, structural and treaty changes, and especially given that the Lisbon Treaty has not yet reached its third birthday. If one believes that the current framework is no longer fit to allow the Union to move towards the shaping of its own future once again, we must allow ourselves the opportunity to debate what the European project ought to be, rather than scrambling for solutions through what exists at present. EU is not perfect, nor is it a panacea for all ills and the significant challenges facing us, but it is a union, and it is one that we have signed up to be a part of. I think it's why it's important that we continue to encourage us all to discuss it, to criticise or to praise it as we see fit, but most of all to engage with it. Thank you.